Daniel Rivers stood at the gates of Stormhill Prison, the clanking sound of his shackles echoing through the cold, unforgiving stone walls. His mind still reeled from the harsh reality that had struck him just weeks before. He had been wrongfully convicted of a crime he hadn't committed. The botched robbery had led to the death of his boss, and although the real culprit was still free, the evidence had pointed to Daniel. The jury had been swift, and the sentence even swifter. Life in Stormhill. As Daniel was led to his cell, he couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of injustice. How could his life have been taken away so quickly? The other prisoners glanced at him with curiosity, some with pity, others with indifference. Stormhill had a reputation that stretched far beyond its walls, a place where hope died and men were broken. But Daniel was determined not to let this place crush his spirit. He was innocent, and he would prove it, no matter how long it took. The first few weeks were the hardest. The isolation, the constant noise, and the unrelenting routine weighed heavily on him. His cell was small, barely big enough to lie down comfortably, with nothing but a thin mattress and a cold steel toilet. The air felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of every broken dream that had ever passed through the walls. Daniel spent most of his time alone, trying to adjust to this new reality. He stayed away from the other prisoners, uncertain of who to trust in a place where survival was the only goal. But it wasn't long before Daniel caught the attention of an older prisoner named Jacob, who had been in Stormhill for nearly 2 decades. Jacob was a quiet, observant man, respected by the other inmates. His calm demeanor set him apart from the usual prison crowd. While many prisoners spent their time plotting escapes or becoming more hardened, Jacob remained steady and reflective. "You're new," Jacob said one day, sitting down beside Daniel during their allotted yard time. "What's your story?" At first, Daniel hesitated. Stormhill wasn't the kind of place where people opened up easily, but something about Jacob's steady gaze and soft tone made Daniel feel a strange sense of trust. He shared his story, how he had been set up, the lack of evidence that could clear him, and the helplessness he had felt throughout his trial. Daniel's voice faltered as he spoke of the hopelessness that had started creeping into his mind. Jacob listened intently. "You're not the first man to come through these gates claiming innocence," he said, "but I've got a feeling you're telling the truth. This place will test you, Daniel. It will push you to your limits. But if you hold on to something, anything, you'll make it through." From that day forward, Daniel and Jacob formed a quiet but unbreakable bond. Jacob had seen many men come and go during his time in Stormhill. Some had been broken beyond repair, while others had found ways to cope. He had learned one thing over the years: knowledge was power, even in a place as unforgiving as Stormhill. He encouraged Daniel to educate himself, to read, and to use his mind as a weapon against the hopelessness that threatened to consume him. Daniel took Jacob's advice to heart. He spent countless hours in the small prison library, poring over books on law, philosophy, and history. The library became his sanctuary, a place where the outside world seemed almost within reach. As he studied the intricacies of the legal system, Daniel's hope began to grow. He learned about appeal procedures and legal loopholes, determined to find a way to prove his innocence. His growing knowledge didn't go unnoticed. Word spread around the prison that Daniel was the man to see if you needed legal advice. He helped fellow prisoners draft appeals, file petitions, and write letters to their families. For the first time since arriving at Stormhill, Daniel felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a number, he was someone who could make a difference, even in the smallest way. Over the years, Daniel's reputation grew. The guards, who once saw him as just another inmate, began to show him respect. He wasn't a troublemaker, he was someone who brought a sense of order to the chaos. It was as if the more knowledge he gained, the more he regained control over his life, even in the confines of Stormhill. Yet even as Daniel found new purpose, the years took their toll. He saw men come in, full of fight, only to leave broken or, worse, never leave at all. The weight of Stormhill was heavy, and there were days when Daniel struggled to keep hope alive. But Jacob was always there, a steady presence in the storm. He never gave up on Daniel, always reminding him that hope was the one thing they could control. One cold winter evening, after nearly a decade in Stormhill, Daniel received news that shook him to his core. A piece of evidence had surfaced, evidence that could potentially exonerate him. It turned out that the real culprit had been arrested for another crime and had confessed to the murder for which Daniel had been convicted. The news spread through Storm Hill like wildfire, and for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to dream of freedom. But the process was slow. The legal system, which had once moved so quickly to convict him, now moved at a glacial pace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months as Daniel waited for the wheels of justice to turn. The waiting was excruciating. Every day he feared something would go wrong, that his appeal would be denied, or that the evidence would be dismissed. The uncertainty gnawed at him, threatening to pull him back into the despair he had worked so hard to escape. Jacob, as always, was a source of strength. "You've come this far," he would remind Daniel. "Don't give up now. You fought too hard for this." Finally, the day came. Daniel was called into the warden's office, where he was told that his conviction had been overturned. He was a free man. The words hit him like a wave, leaving him speechless. After all the years of waiting, the injustice had been righted. He could hardly believe it. He would walk out of Storm Hill a free man, no longer a prisoner. The next morning, Daniel stood at the gates of Storm Hill once again. This time, they were opening for him to leave. The air outside felt different, fresher, lighter, full of possibility. As he looked back at the prison, he realized that while Storm Hill had taken years of his life, it had also given him something valuable. It had taught him about hope, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. Jacob had come to see him off, his face a mix of pride and sadness. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have made it without you." Jacob smiled, the lines on his face deepening. "You did this, Daniel. You kept the hope alive. That's what got you through." With one last look at the towering walls of Storm Hill, Daniel turned and walked away, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The world outside was unfamiliar, but he was ready for it. He had survived Storm Hill, and now he was free. Not just free from the prison, but free to live his life on his own terms. As he took his first steps into the unknown, Daniel knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same resilience that had carried him through the darkest of days. In the end, it wasn't just the system that had freed him. It was his unyielding hope, the friendships he had forged, and the belief that no matter how grim things seemed, there was always a way forward. Because in the end, freedom wasn't just about walking out of a prison, it was about walking into a future full of hope, purpose, and the knowledge that even in the darkest places, light could still be found.